first investment when I get out of school, like them, and I start investing in the stock markets. So I use some of my knowledge for my classes, like they can understand. So you should tell your story, but you still like giving a first step into the room of, in this case, of
the curse of knowledge. What we've been practicing for decades, it becomes really evident to us. And how do you find out what their language is? What is it that they use? What is jargon? What is not? How do you? Hi everybody, welcome to the academic room where inspiring educators share their best practices. And today it's my absolute pleasure to welcome the fantastic Emanuel Balsa in the room. He is the professor of accounting and finance. Hi Emanuel, welcome to the academic room, and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And let's go right into it. You are a big advocate of debunking the jargon from the financial education and debunking financial confusion. So bringing it to the school, you are also a lecturer. How do you do it when you start teaching students, when you start the first lecture or the semester with them? How do you make sure that it's exciting for them, it's easy to understand, it captures their attention? What are your techniques? Please share a few with us.
I think it's a great question. So first of all, thank you very much. I want to say hello to all the audience, listen to us. And I believe is a difficult one because regarding with the investment and finance, there is this complex language. So we need to break it down. I call it like building blocks. So I start normally with an example. So first I give an example from my life or from past students when they have to do some kind of financial decision, like investing or saving or buy a expensive asset like a car. And then normally I start with a small example like investment when I get out of school, like them, and I start investing in the stock markets. So I use some of my knowledge for my classes, like sectorial economics. So we analyze like the sectors and I invested based on that. So I would say, yeah, first point, the example. Second one, I would say like engage with them. And on that part, I believe you should create a language they can understand. So you should tell your story, but you still like giving a first step into the room of, in this case, of the financial world. You know, so I believe that is really like important, like to capture their attention. And like on third point, I like to involve them and ask them like to engage, to be like more committed and to feel like they can also share their experience. So I will break it down in that sense.
Thank you so much for sharing it. When you talk about engaging them and involving them and using their language, it's sometimes difficult because of the curse of knowledge. What we've been practicing for decades, it becomes really evident to us. And how do you find out what their language is? What is it that they use? What is jargon? What is not? How do you engagement with the students? What do you actually do to involve them?
Yeah, it's a great question because when I start like teaching, I feel that was one of the biggest struggle. So right now, like my real example is like try to connect with really like common things, like to give you like quick examples. Like I said, the financial system is like your body, like you have your heart and it's pumping like the blood. So the blood is like the money flowing into the financial system. So I use this kind of analogies that we go like through the concepts using like normal things that they can relate with their real life and they can like get into the concept and really tap them. And then I start with a simple concept and then I introduce like the technical language. So I'll say, okay, this is the financial system and the financial system has this definition and work like this. So you have all these different kind of markets. So you have the stock market, the bond market, and you can introduce like these slight analogies or slight small stories that they can really connect and really feel at least a little bit more engaging and not so boring, because I believe in our area sometimes, and as a teacher I also feel that. And when I'm seeing, like when I take courses of my own, I also feel if this the way that we speak and the way we grab attention is not properly adapt to our audience, you face a real struggle like to capture them, and you feel like some people are like lost or are not really into what you are saying. And the second thing, I also think that we have like different, like every class in each class is like different, so you cannot like use always the same methods. I don't know if you understand what I mean, but I think you need to adapt. And in my case, I give classes to different kind of people, in the sense that I have like classes for people that are already working at the evening, but I also have two are kind of normal students. So you need to adapt.
Mhm. I find it really brilliant. Demonstration over description always helps. And I like that you bring some analogy from their everyday life they can relate to. Really brilliant. Mentioning this adapting to various kinds of students, how do you do that? And specifically, being inclusive with this, what do you do when you notice some students are slower to capture it, while there are others who would be really happy to know more and really go faster? How can you manage this in the classroom?
I will say repetition, repetition, and repetition. So I try to put the same questions a lot and across like the different time span of all the period that we have to teach, so they can remember. By that mean, we know by the corner of learning, or some people call it like the pyramid of learning, that we understand just a little bit by reading, but we understand a lot by teaching. So I also feel not only us as a teacher, but also the students, they can teach each other. So kind of my methods that I'm testing, and I feel it has some good results on my classes, is I just start by normally giving a story, and then we kind of engage on it, and we can do like small questions. And normally I try to pull up people, because I feel there are a lot of introverts, and I think it's good for them, and when they enter in the job market, to kind of break the ice and know how to do these social connections, because I believe also a little bit connected with the COVID era, like they lost a little bit this kind of social communication skills that we normally have before. So I think it's good to give this stimulus to them. And how I do that, I will say like start to asking them like simple question, but if they don't answer, like I ask to another colleague, like, can you help your colleague? And I say their name. So I feel that bring a kind of a unity and a reciprocity, so they can help each other. And I say that because I one of my favorite books is Influence from Robert Cialdini. And I believe one of the great idea that he has is like he talks about how he's giving classes, and he says at the end of the class you always feel like students are like packing their stuff and ready to leave. So he said, like, use the story or use like some mysterious thing that you are going to show them. So to grab their attention. And I'm working and introducing this little by little. And I think it has some impact, to be strictly honest with you. And I think it's a good idea. It's not mine, but I'm sharing with you. So I believe it could be important, like to grab attention, because as we know, like today, like people and the younger generation are getting less and lesser time span in terms of attention. So I was reading some interesting statistics that they say the time we can spend right now is around like 30 to 28 minutes. So if you don't block and you don't like divide this in different blocks like the class, I think you will have that problem. And in short term, we know because of the social media and everything, like people, I think it was, let me try to recall, but I believe was from 12 seconds to 8 seconds. So people, our attention span is getting smaller and smaller by the day.
That's very interesting because another professor I interviewed, Dr. Lilia Clark, said the same, that the studies and that uses the same, that it's kind of blocks of 20 or 30 minutes you can really kind of teach. And then there's another activity that you involve and then confirm if they understood it. And I really like your method of asking someone, and if they don't answer, like passing it on and saying, can you have them? That's really brilliant. In terms of the changing the activities, do you give students some activities to work on in groups or pairs or individually? So are there any activities they are working in, seminars, or I don't know how you structure your teaching? And if yes, what is it? Can you tell us a few examples of how you make sure that they actually can practice what they've learned from you?
Yeah, overall, I will say I have these building blocks of like three parts. So around like 20 to 30 minutes each. So the first one is like activities connected with real life. So I sometimes I try to bring like real life cases connected with my topic, which is like financial markets. So we talk about like interest rates or about some financial scheme that happened. So they understand a little bit about the topics that we are talking. We can introduce some of the concepts that we will teach on the second block, which is teaching and is more like explaining like the theories and the concepts. And then on a third block, I will say like is more like or exercises, something practical, or is more like an open discussion. Sometimes it's not possible, like we know we have a lot to cover. So I'm saying this like time spans like a reference. It's not like a strict rule, but it helps me like organize like and plan like the class, and I feel like they are more engaged and they like to participate.
Mhm.
Another thing that I say is important for my experience on financial markets is that here in my case in Portugal, I don't know if you are aware, but like the financial literacy level is like really low.
It's
It's like I
everywhere.
believe we're the second worst from Europe, so it's not good. And I kind of try to put a green flag and to help them because I think we need to move from the theory from the practice because a lot of things they don't understand because they don't practice. And again, if they can know how to explain others, they probably will be better. And I think like in that case, I will do some examples. I also do sometimes like real-time tutorials. So I open like the platforms. I do it with them. So if they want, they can follow up on their computer or they can take notes. But I feel that like creates more like connection and more unity within the class, and they start working in groups. And I also use that at the beginning, like when they don't know too much about their colleagues, and they start to building like their groups for this kind of assignment. Like I used to, it's a funny story, but I also said like introduce yourselves, say like your three favorite things, and I give them like 5 minutes. But I said to them, choose the person that you don't know like in the class. So no, don't go like for your best friend, but go for the other ones. Yeah,
Hmm.
overall.
That's brilliant, and we will come back to it. But just before that, you mentioned some platforms that you show. So, do you use some tools, platforms in your teaching? And if yes, what are those?
Yeah, I'm more talking about like my specific case, which is financial markets that I
Familiar.
teach. So I use like investing.com,
Mhm.
sorry. Um, in other platforms like FinChat.io, um, Guru
No,
Focus is also nice. Simple Wall Street, so are like niche to our teaching, but they can get like the first steps how to do like security analysis, like to understand stocks, to understand what we are talking about. And I try to keep it like balanced in terms of quantitative and qualitative methods. So I try to give them the broader view so they don't get lost in the numbers, because numbers are important, but we need, in this case, and it's like in everything, is like a company. But in this case, like we need to understand the numbers, but that we need to understand the business above all. So you need to understand what they are doing, what are like the prospects, what is like the forecast for the future, what is like the news. And I also talk a little bit about emotion. So I always start my classes like we are seeing an index called the Fear and Greed Index. So it's kind of building a story across all the weeks. So we see how the stock market in the United States is like moving, and how the Indian stock market also is moving. So we look at the people emotions in the markets, so they can understand that we are talking about the emotion about the masses. So it's like mass psychology, and there is like some really interesting books about like market psychology. And I'm really into that. Like even in personal life, I think almost like everything is like human psychology and our relationships. So I feel they connect with it, and I show them like this is like an index that the values like go from extreme fear to extreme greed. So you can see like the true emotions. Like if you are into psychology, you know, like the true emotions is like fear and hope. So you have these two emotions like reflected in the stock markets. So they can feel like each day now is moving, now is lower, now is almost in extreme greed, so it's not a good time to buy. And they say to me and then discuss to me sometimes at the end of the class. So it's
This is really fascinating, Emmanuel. I really love that you give them a combination of the theory, the background, the foundations, the structures, and then the platforms, the practical things, and also how you bring in emotion. Because this is what everybody thinks
Mhm.
finance is something like very much rational and, oh, finance is not for me. And it's so much emotional, really, in everyday life. Absolutely great. But just one more thing, and then I'd like to move on to another topic. You mentioned exercises they do. You mentioned these platforms. What kind of exercises can you give students in the topic of finance and accounting that they can work on the class?
Mhm. There are more like traditional like exercises from like the books, like the classical ones that I use, of course, and are evaluated on that. But we also moving to another step, which they want like more practical knowledge. So I try to incorporate that with the mini, I call it mini or short case studies.
Mhm.
So I think you should balance that. And what I feel from my short experience on teaching is that they want something more. So we need to create an educational system that have, on my 3 cents of knowledge, that have these two like big building blocks, which is the traditional system, but I also call it like the alternative school. Because to give you practical examples, like I teach financial markets, but we still didn't incorporate like the cryptocurrencies. But they taught me a lot about the cryptocurrency. So at the end of the class, I talk with them. So that is why I see the need for these two
Mhm.
building blocks working together. And I feel in some way like the social media, like the podcasts, like we having now, even the YouTube, all this free knowledge, if it's used like wisely and if they search for quality content, they will find it, because it's a kind of a way that is complementing our traditional educational system and are providing like the needs that they have right now. Because sometimes the educational system is slow to follow up with the trends inside. In my case, I'm talking about financial markets, but I believe in on other areas this applies to.
Mhm. No, this is really good, and I'd like to follow up on this because you mentioned, and really you're a big advocate on including in education topics also on personal development, emotional intelligence, and you say that the education system fails to include this. So how do you add it? You teach obviously finance accounting, but how do you incorporate teaching them about personal development, networking, something that you've mentioned here? Emotional intelligence you also touched on. So how do you incorporate it?
Yeah. I think we need to look at our greatest test, which is time. I always say this. So we have limited time in our lives, and like each year we have this normal like visuals that appear on the internet and on social media that says that you have like 86,400 like dollars, but it's making like a funny analogy with the time that we have like each year. So it's like, yeah, time is a limited resources. So of course I will want to introduce a lot of new topics in the educational system. I understand the difficulty that we have because we need to choose what is the best. And sometimes that is our choice. So you can go like by collecting feedback or reflecting on the numbers that you have on your specific university, but you can also like understand the needs in the market. So understand like what the job market is asking, what our students are requesting like for. So yeah, I think we should introduce, at least get a feeling. Like I told you, like at the beginning, at the end of the class, I like to do some question. And there I think is a good monument, like to test them and to understand a little bit of that. So to explore like these topics that I'm really into, like emotional intelligence, personal development. And that starts like by giving like these short stories or something that inspire them about like your life. At the beginning of the classes, like on my first class, I always say like when I finished my PhD, I decided to do a gap year. So I traveled the world and I also learned a lot from that. And that brings like curiosity. And I understood from that kind of small exercise that a lot of, in my case, a lot of my students, I will say probably more than 50% say they want to be a teacher, and probably between 20 to 30% they said they want to travel the world. So it's funny to see, like, to understand, like, I'm talking about this year, but it's funny to see how they see the world and how, like, we as teacher can be their inspiration to some of them. And the other ones, they will share like what they like. Of course, there is a small minority that don't actually know what they want. So normally I say, in your ideal life, what do you want to do? Say it like, think like 5 years from now. What do you imagine being in that time frame? So I think that opens a little bit that mind, because I feel some of them at the beginnings, they're kind of lost. So I think to wrap it all together, I think, yeah, it's really important, like the emotional part, not only in the investment, because we do a lot of bad financial decisions because our emotions. I always said, I always say, like, if inside like your house with your family, like we are emotional, imagine yourself, just you and yourself making your investments. It will be like something like that you really need to understand your minds and how your emotions are affecting you. Like if the price of the stock like go down 20%, what do you do? If you don't have like a strategy, you don't know what to do. But I also say, like, for the positive side, which is sometimes they are not aware, like if your investment go like 100% up, what do you do? And I think that is a critical point, because people don't know how to deal with the emotions, but they don't plan. So it's really important, like, to plan in our lives and also in investment.
Yeah, thank you, Manuel. It's very evident that you're not only knowledgeable, but also very approachable. I think it really helps students connect and build that rapport. And I really learned a lot. I took some notes. Thank you for sharing everything. And I know I'm following you on LinkedIn and know that you're also educating the people, not just your students. So I will add all the link and bio into the description of this video. Thank you for being here, Manuel. It was a pleasure to have you. And thank you, everybody else, for being here for this episode of the Academic Room. See you the next time. Bye-bye.
So much.